The sound of his words, "People like you don't belong here," cut through the quiet like a blade. The audience hadn't even had time to react. On stage, Gregory Vance, a colossal figure in his impeccably tailored navy suit, held the gilded award. With a swift, deliberate motion he tore it in two. The paper's crisp rip echoed like a gunshot, and the pieces fluttered to the polished stage floor, settling at the feet of 17-year-old Alina Brooks. She had earned that award with 2 arduous years of relentless effort. Gasps rippled through the stunned crowd and a muffled laugh sliced the air. But Alina didn't even flinch. She stood perfectly still because beneath the searing humiliation, a counterplan was already forming. One that would flip this moment on its head and leave the entire room in shocked silence. "Don't look away. You're about to witness the most unforgettable takedown you've ever seen." Under the harsh glare of the stage lights, Alina Brooks felt like she was standing on thin ice. The air was thick with the low murmur of the assembled crowd, journalists, philanthropists, and industry titans filling every seat. Next to her, the imposing figure of Gregory Vance, the celebrated tech billionaire, turned to face the audience, his smile as cutting as broken glass. In his perfectly manicured hands he held the award she had just received, its embossed seal glinting under the lights. Without a moment's hesitation he ripped it in half. The sound was a loud, intentional tear that rang out like a gunshot. A wave of gasps broke the stunned quiet. "Did that just happen?" a voice whispered from the crowd. The camera zoomed in on Vance's composed face as he announced, "This is what happens when we lower our standards." His eyes swept over Alina's dark brown skin, her worn blazer, and the slight tremor in her hands. His unspoken message was loud and clear for everyone to hear. What the crowd saw as a moment of public shame, Alina saw as a moment of absolute clarity. Every injustice she had ever faced seemed to condense into a single, undeniable truth. This was not the end of her story. Her heart hammered in her ears, but she straightened her posture, fighting back the threat of tears. The elegant auditorium, with its chandeliers and marble pillars, had transformed from a place of recognition into a stage for public mockery. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside the spotlight, her mind raced, replaying the last few months in a frantic loop. The long hours at the public library in downtown Philadelphia, teaching herself advanced coding from free textbooks and blurry YouTube videos. The quiet support from Mrs. Hawthorne, the librarian who always saved the best programming manuals for her. The late nights at the kitchen table of their tiny apartment, repairing her prototype with discarded parts. Each memory was a reminder not to crush her, but to reinforce who she was and what she had created. Her invention, the Predictive Health Interface or PHI, had been her passion project. Designed to detect subtle health changes before they became life-threatening, it was inspired by her mother's sudden collapse 3 years prior. PHI was more than just code and hardware. It was a distillation of her grief, love, and fierce determination to prevent other families from suffering the same way hers had. Yet in this grand hall, Gregory Vance had turned it into a mere prop for his own performance. The judges shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. The audience, a mix of horrified and captivated onlookers, remained silent. That silence was the most deafening sound Alina had ever heard. It was the silence of complicity, the kind that allows injustice to thrive. And in that silence she began to plan her next move. Outside, the cold autumn air stung her cheeks as she walked past reporters shouting her name. She ignored them, her mind singularly focused. She would prove him wrong, not just for herself, but for every young black girl who had ever been told she didn't belong in a room where decisions were made. At home, the soft light of her desk lamp illuminated PA, the small device resting like a dormant creature. Its sleek exterior concealed a complex neural network trained to identify health patterns invisible to the human eye. She ran her fingers along its smooth surface. "We're not done yet," she whispered. That night, sleep was impossible. She read every article she could find about Gregory Vance's company, Vanguard Technologies. Patterns emerged in the headlines, mentions of efficiency models, resource allocation, and algorithms, business terms that sounded harmless to an outsider. But to Alina, they hinted at a darker truth. Systems designed to decide who received help and who was quietly left behind. The more she read, the more the pieces clicked into place. Vance hadn't just doubted her. He had recognized her work. The similarities between PHI and Vanguard's new healthcare initiative were too precise to be a coincidence. The realization was both infuriating and empowering. By sunrise, she had the outline of her counterattack. Defending herself with words wouldn't be enough. She had to strike where he least expected it, in front of the same cameras he had used to humiliate her. She knew the risks. Going against a billionaire with an army of lawyers was like walking into a storm without an umbrella. But storms, she reasoned, are just another form of energy, and energy can be harnessed. As the city began to stir, Alina stepped out into the pale morning light, her backpack slung over her shoulder. Inside, Pi hummed softly as if it knew what was coming. The humiliation had not broken her. It had ignited a fire that would burn brighter than any spotlight. In that moment she understood a simple, profound truth. Public shame only has power if you accept its definition of you. And she refused. The morning after her public humiliation, the city outside Alina Brooks's apartment hummed with a rhythm of its own. The distant groan of buses and the casual chatter of neighbors seemed to mock the stillness inside her small, dimly lit room. Her desk was a controlled chaos of loose code, a well-worn soldering iron, and the small, unassuming device she called P. For almost 2 years, Peach-Eye had been her constant companion, born from nights when the rest of the city slept and she was hunched over library books, tracing algorithms until they finally clicked. It wasn't just technology. It was her defiance against the limitations others had set for her. When her high school counselor recommended a practical trade, she saw a world of equations. Where others saw rusted electronics in a thrift store bin, she saw the potential for something powerful. This morning, however, she looked at Peach-Eye not as just an invention but as a weapon. Not to harm but to expose. It was built to detect early signs of a health crisis, to spot subtle changes in heart rate, oxygen levels, or even the cadence of a voice that could signal an oncoming stroke. For a person like her mother, whose collapse had been sudden and irreversible, Peach-Eye could have been the difference between life and death. Alina's mind kept returning to Gregory Vance's cruel words on stage. This is what happens when we lower our standards. The insult was a sharp sting, but underneath it lay a clue she couldn't ignore. He hadn't rejected her project because it was flawed. He had rejected it because it was a direct threat to something his own company was building. She opened her laptop and began to dig through Vanguard Technologies' public patents and press releases. For most people, these documents were a dry and tangled mess of legal speak. For Alina, they were a puzzle waiting to be solved. She was looking for a signature, a familiar string of logic. And there it was. A sequence in one of their predictive algorithms that was an eerie mirror image of her own. But suspicion wasn't proof. Proving a theft in technology wasn't as simple as proving someone had stolen a bike. Code could be rewritten, repackaged, and buried under layers of new additions until its origins were almost impossible to trace. She needed help, but not just any help. She needed the right kind. Alina closed her laptop and headed for the Philadelphia Central Library, a magnificent old building of marble and pillars where Mrs. Hawthorne worked. The librarian was more than just a gatekeeper of books. She was the quiet architect of Alina's education. Mrs. Hawthorne had always found ways to give her access to books beyond her grade level and had often waived the computer usage limits so Alina could code late into the evening. That afternoon, Mrs. Hawthorne found her in the deepest corner of the library, staring intently at a screen. "You look like you're about to burn a hole right through that monitor," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They stole my work," Alina replied without looking up. "I know they did. I just can't prove it." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time you stopped digging alone." With a few taps on her own computer, she bypassed security protocols with an ease that made Alina's eyebrows shoot up. "You're not just a librarian, are you?" Alina asked. "Once upon a time I was a research fellow in computational neuroscience. But degrees don't always count the same when you cross certain borders," Mrs. Hawthorne said. "Now let's see what kind of trouble we can get into." Together they accessed academic databases and archived medical AI reports that Alina didn't even know existed. Buried within a data set from 2 years prior, they found something damning. A test version of Vanguard's healthcare algorithm that recommended fewer interventions for patients from low-income zip codes, a pattern that PHI could both detect and prevent. But the real blow came when Mrs. Hawthorne pulled up a leaked internal memo from a whistleblower forum. In cold, technical language, It described the integration of an algorithm named HLX9 into Vanguard's platform. Alina froze. HLX9 was the exact code name she'd hidden in the metadata of her original science fair submission. "That's my work," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "They didn't just copy the concept. They copied the code." Mrs. Hawthorne leaned back, folding her arms. "Then we have our opening." Over the next week, Alina's life became a careful balancing act between school, the hospital where her grandmother was undergoing tests for a heart condition, and her covert investigation into Vanguard. She spent hours perfecting PHI, not just as a diagnostic tool, but as a system capable of exposing bias within a larger network. She wanted it to demonstrate live and unedited how Vanguard's algorithm chose who deserved care. Outside of these late-night coding sessions, she cautiously began reaching out to people in the AI ethics community. One contact, a former Vanguard employee named Dr. Lorraine Grant, responded with a simple but powerful message. "I know what they did to you. I've been waiting for someone like you to fight back." Dr. Grant explained that she had been fired after raising concerns about the ethical implications of Vanguard's system. She still had documents proving that the algorithm was intentionally designed to reduce coverage for patients deemed unprofitable, a decision often tied to race, income, or location. By the time their first call ended, Alina's plan had evolved. She wouldn't just defend her reputation, she would dismantle his. And she would do it where it hurt him most, in front of the same audience that had once celebrated his name. But there was one major hurdle. To enter the National Innovators Conference where Vance was scheduled to speak, she needed a guardian present, and her real name would immediately raise a red flag. Mrs. Hawthorne didn't hesitate. "If you need a guardian, I'll be your guardian," she said firmly. "And if they ask why, I'll tell them the truth. No child should have their work stolen, especially not by the people who claim to be saving lives." The pieces were falling into place. I was almost ready. Dr. Grant's documents were secured. Mrs. Hawthorne had the paperwork to get her into the conference under the name Alina Carter, a fabricated identity with a backstory as a student from a private STEM academy. Finally, as she sat by her grandmother's hospital bed one quiet evening, Alina realized the true weight of what she was doing. Her grandmother, unaware of the storm brewing, reached for her hand and said softly, "You're going to change things, baby. Not just for you but for people you'll never even meet." That was when Alina understood. This was no longer just about clearing her name. It was about rewriting the rules of a game that had been rigged long before she ever stepped onto that stage. The plan took shape like a photograph developing in a dark room. Alina Brooks knew she couldn't afford a single mistake. She had been publicly humiliated once before, and this time the stage would be even larger. The National Innovators Conference in Los Angeles was more than just a competition. It was a gathering of the most influential minds in technology, medicine, and media. Gregory Vance would be there to unveil his new healthcare algorithm, the very one she knew was built on the stolen foundation of her own work. If she was going to expose him, it had to happen there in real time with no chance for him to control the narrative before it reached the public. But there were barriers at every turn. The conference had ironclad security, requiring background checks for all presenters and official guardianship for minors. Using her real name would get her flagged instantly. This was where Mrs. Hawthorne's quiet resolve became essential. She helped Alina construct an entirely new identity. Alina Carter, a student from a prestigious STEM preparatory school in Vermont. They painstakingly created forged transcripts, a fake ID, and even a mock school website to make her untraceable for the short window she would need to execute her plan. Even with a new identity, Alina faced a second problem: her evidence. Raw code and internal memos meant nothing to an audience of non-programmers. She needed a way to show the injustice in a form anyone could understand. Mrs. Hawthorne suggested a live demonstration. Run Vanguard's algorithm and PHI side by side on the same patient profiles, letting the audience watch the decisions play out in real time. It would be like watching two referees judge the same play, one fair, one clearly biased. The difference would be undeniable. To make this possible, Alina contacted Dr. Lorraine Grant, who provided anonymized medical case files of patients who had been denied treatment by Vanguard's system. From these, Alina built a user-friendly interface for PHI that could display both systems' results simultaneously. If Vanguard's program rejected a patient while PHI flagged them as high risk, It would be instantly visible on the huge screen in the hall. But a technical gap remained. The conference's presentation system was protected by firewalls designed to block unauthorized uploads. This was where Ethan Voss came in. She had met him through a private coding forum, where his username, ByteGhost, was spoken of with a mix of awe and caution. Ethan, only a few years her senior, had the kind of hacking skills that made headlines. When she explained her situation, he was skeptical. "You're going up against a billionaire on his own turf in front of his people," he said. "You know they'll have countermeasures." "I know," she said, her eyes meeting his through the flicker of their video call. "That's why I'm not asking you to break in. I'm asking you to build me a door. I'll be the one to walk through it." Over the next week, Ethan created a discreet backdoor in the conference's network. It wasn't a brute force hack that would trigger alarms, but a quiet insertion, like hiding a key under a doormat no one noticed. The door would let PHI's data stream to the presentation screen at the exact moment she needed it. Meanwhile, Alina practiced her delivery. She couldn't simply accuse Vance outright. She had to guide the audience to the conclusion themselves. People often resist being told what to think, but if they saw the evidence unfold with their own eyes, the truth would be impossible to deny. She rehearsed her words, her pauses, and the precise moment she would turn to face the audience for maximum impact. Her resolve was tested when her grandmother's health took a sudden turn. Clara Brooks was admitted to the hospital after a dizzy spell, and the doctors informed Alina that surgery was needed sooner rather than later. When the insurance response came back, her grandmother's case had been denied as low priority for intervention, the very discriminatory algorithm at the heart of her fight. This was no longer an abstract injustice. It was a personal attack on her family. For one sleepless night, Alina considered abandoning the plan. But as she sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, Clara squeezed her hand and whispered, "You've got something they can't take from you, your voice. Don't waste it." The next morning, Alina's preparations intensified. She gathered every piece of evidence: PHI's original source code, time-stamped project submissions, Dr. Grant's internal memos, and the patient data comparisons. Each was encrypted and backed up in multiple secure locations. She knew that the moment she went public, Vanguard would try to erase everything. By the time she boarded the plane to Los Angeles with Mrs. Hawthorne, her presentation was second nature. Still, anxiety weighed heavy in her chest. It wasn't the fear of public speaking. It was the awareness that one wrong move could let Vance twist the narrative again, painting her as unstable or even a criminal. On their first night in Los Angeles, Ethan met them at a quiet cafe to finalize the technical setup. He handed her a small USB drive. "When you're on stage, plug this into the main console. That's all you have to do. The system will do the rest. But remember, once you start, there's no stopping it." Alina closed her fingers around the drive. "Good. I don't want to stop." As they walked back to the hotel, Mrs. Hawthorne placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow isn't just about you proving them wrong," she said. "It's about making sure the next girl doesn't have to prove herself at all." That night, Alina lay awake staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the city outside mixing with her steady heartbeat. She imagined the moment the screen would light up with the truth, the collective gasp of the audience, and the silence that would follow. Not the silence of complicity, but the stunned quiet of people realizing they had witnessed something they could never unsee. Tomorrow, she thought, was not just a day for justice. It was the day she would take back the narrative they had tried to steal from her. And once she had it back, she would make sure it belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The cavernous hall of the Los Angeles Convention Center buzzed with an electric energy. Hundreds of attendees settled into their seats, the air thick with anticipation. Massive LED screens behind the stage projected the sleek Vanguard Technologies logo. Spotlights swept across the audience before settling on the podium where Gregory Vance was scheduled to speak. Backstage, Alina Brooks, cloaked in the identity of Alina Carter, stood perfectly still. The weight of the USB drive in her pocket was a constant reminder that every second from here on out had to be flawless. Mrs. Hawthorne stood beside her, calm and steady, while Ethan Voss sat at the back of the room, his laptop open, already connected to the conference network. The plan had been rehearsed so many times it felt like muscle memory, but the stakes made Alina's pulse race. She could feel the raw memory of her last public humiliation, but this time she wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to take control of the story. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage without hesitation. Her chin was lifted and the applause was polite but distracted. The attendees had come for Vance, she was just the opener. She began her presentation as she had practiced, introducing PHI as an AI-powered health analysis tool capable of detecting early warning signs in patient data. She spoke in clear terms, explaining algorithms like recipes with simple steps leading to a precise result. Some in the audience nodded, but others scrolled through their phones waiting for the main event. Then she shifted. "We've been told technology is neutral," she said, her voice now carrying a new power. "But technology is only as fair as the people who build it. And sometimes it's built to choose who gets care and who doesn't." Her words made the first few heads lift from their devices. From the corner of her eye, she saw Vance enter at the back of the hall, surrounded by his assistants. His confident stride slowed when he recognized her. His expression hardened, but he didn't move to stop her. Not yet. It was time. Alina walked to the console at the center of the stage, her hands steady as she inserted the USB drive. For a moment nothing happened. Then the massive screens behind her lit up, split down the middle. On the left, PHI's analysis of anonymized patient cases. On the right, Vanguard's system running the exact same cases. Names and identifying details were blurred, but the outcomes were instantly clear. PHI flagged high-risk conditions for patients of all income levels. Vanguard's system, however, denied interventions for almost all patients from certain zip codes, codes associated with poorer neighborhoods. A murmur ran through the audience. Alina let the data speak for itself, case after case appearing in real time. "These aren't hypothetical scenarios," she said. "These are real decisions made by an algorithm in use today. And every denial is a life put at risk, not because of medical need but because of profit margins." Suddenly, Vance strode down the aisle toward the stage. His voice boomed without a microphone. "Cut the feed," he shouted to the technicians, but Ethan was already at work in the background, locking the system so the screen stayed lit. Vance climbed the steps, trying to take the microphone from her. Alina stepped back. "You can try to talk over me," she said, her voice completely steady, "but you can't talk over the truth." She gestured to the screens. "And this is your truth, Mr. Vance." The murmurs grew into a loud wave of disapproval. Some audience members began filming with their phones. At that moment, Dr. Lorraine Grant emerged from the crowd, a folder in her hand. Without a word, she took a microphone. "I worked for Vanguard," she said. "And I was fired for objecting to exactly what you're seeing right now." She opened the folder and held up printed internal memos, undeniable evidence of deliberate bias. Before the room could fully absorb the weight of the revelations, the lights flickered. A sudden storm outside had caused a brief power drop. For a second the screens went black and the sound system buzzed with static. Vance seized the moment, yelling for security to escort Alina away. But as the backup generators kicked in, the screens lit up again, not just inside the hall but streamed across multiple online platforms. Ethan had used the blackout window to push the feed globally. The audience gasped as messages flooded in from viewers watching live across the country. The room shifted. The silence wasn't passive this time. It was the stunned quiet of collective realization. Vance's composure cracked. The smug smile he had worn on every public stage was gone, replaced by the tight-lipped grimace of someone who had completely lost control. Security hesitated, unsure who to remove now that the crowd was clearly on Alina's side. Finally, Alina stepped forward. "You once told me I didn't belong here," she said, looking directly at him, her voice reaching the back rows. "I'm here today to tell you that neither does corruption, discrimination, or greed dressed up as innovation." The applause began tentatively, then swelled until it filled the entire hall. Even as Vance turned away, the images behind them continued to play, the truth unfolding for all to see. She had walked onto that stage with the weight of humiliation. She walked off with the certainty that she had forced the world to see what it wanted to ignore. And this time there was no tearing it down. In the days that followed the conference, the world seemed to settle after the storm. The viral footage of Alina Brooks's presentation had spread faster than she could have imagined, echoing across social media, news channels, and online forums. Gregory Vance's carefully crafted image crumbled in real time. Each interview request he dodged only fueled the speculation. By the end of the week, Vanguard Technologies' board of directors announced his resignation, citing ethical concerns and a need for renewed leadership. But victory didn't feel like a celebration. The attention was overwhelming. News vans camped outside her apartment building and strangers stopped her in grocery store aisles, some to thank her, others to question her motives. For a person who had always blended into the background, becoming the center of a national conversation was disorienting. Mrs. Hawthorne helped her navigate the noise, reminding her that every great impact comes with a cost. "The louder you speak," she said, "the more people will try to drown you out. But the ones who matter will listen." One of those who mattered was her grandmother. Clara Brooks's surgery, once denied, was now scheduled without delay. Alina sat by her hospital bed the night before the operation, the two of them watching the city lights flicker through the window. "You've already saved me," Clara whispered, "not just with this surgery. Because you refused to let them decide my worth." Dr. Lorraine Grant reached out with another offer, not for media interviews but for a partnership. She proposed creating an independent, non-profit version of PHI that could be freely distributed to clinics in underserved areas. "We can build it without the greed," she said. "We can build it to serve, not to exclude." The idea immediately took root in Alina's mind. She was determined not to let the project fall under the control of any single corporation or individual. Instead of selling PHI's rights, she created a licensing model that allowed communities to adapt it for their own needs, with all revenue reinvested into a public innovation fund. It was a safeguard against the very kind of exploitation she had just fought against. Ethan Voss continued to help behind the scenes, securing PHI's open-source code against tampering. Danielle Rivers, the investigative journalist who had covered the conference, used her platform to highlight the systemic issues in healthcare technology that went far beyond Vanguard. It was no longer just Alina's story. It was a catalyst for a much larger conversation. Months later, as spring warmed the air in New Orleans, Alina stood on the deck of a refurbished riverboat moored at the edge of the Mississippi. The boat had been transformed into a mobile innovation lab, equipped with laptops, solar panels, and medical diagnostic tools. Children from the neighborhood clambered aboard, their laughter filling the air as they explored the equipment. She introduced PHI to them, not as a symbol of her own victory, but as a tool that belonged to them. "This isn't about one person being brilliant," she told the group gathered around her. "It's about making sure everyone has the chance to solve the problems they see." But even in moments of joy, she felt the quiet weight of what she had learned. Injustice rarely ends with one person's downfall. It shifts, changes shape, and finds new ways to hide. Her work, she knew, was only just beginning. Still, she allowed herself one moment to stand at the railing, watching the river carry its slow, steady current out to the horizon. She thought about the stage where it all began, the sound of paper tearing in her ears, and how that sound had once felt like the end. Now it was just the first note in a song she was still learning to play. In the end, she understood a simple but enduring truth. The fight for fairness wasn't a single battle won in front of cameras. It was in the quiet, consistent work of building systems that could not be twisted against the people they were meant to help. And if she could do that, one community, one innovation at a time, then no stage, no spotlight, and no amount of power could ever silence her again. Alina Brooks's journey began with a moment of public humiliation that could have ended her story before it truly began. On a brightly lit stage in front of cameras and a live audience, Gregory Vance ripped apart not only her award but, in his eyes, her very worth. For many, that would have been the end. For Alina, it became the start of something far greater. Determined to uncover the truth, she traced stolen code from Vanguard Technologies back to her own invention, PHI. Along the way, she found allies in unexpected places. Mrs. Hawthorne, a quiet librarian with a past in computational neuroscience. Dr. Lorraine Grant, a whistleblower who defied corporate greed. And Ethan Voss, the coder who built the doorway into the system meant to keep her out. The Los Angeles showdown was the culmination of every sacrifice she had made. On that stage, Alina didn't just present data. She revealed in real time the human cost of discriminatory algorithms. Vance tried to silence her, but the truth had already spread, streaming live across the nation. The very stage he once used to humiliate her became the place his own career unraveled. Yet her true victory wasn't in Vance's downfall. It was in what followed. Alina refused to sell PHI to the highest bidder. instead creating a non-profit model so clinics in underserved communities could use it free of corporate control. Her grandmother, once denied care by the very system she fought, received her surgery and lived to see Alina's vision touch lives far beyond their family. Months later, Alina's work continued, quietly but powerfully, in neighborhoods, community centers, and on a repurposed riverboat turned mobile innovation lab. She taught children how technology could be a tool for justice, planting seeds for the next generation of creators and leaders. Her story isn't just about one girl standing up to one man. It's about the truth that power can be challenged and that voices dismissed as too small can shake the walls of the powerful. The fight doesn't end with one victory. It continues in steady, deliberate steps. The lesson is clear. You don't need permission to fight for what's right. The world may try to define your worth by its flawed standards, but you have the power to write your own. Even the most painful moments can become the foundation for something unshakable if you refuse to stop. Injustice today might not look like a ripped award. It might be a quiet bias in a workplace, an unfair decision in a boardroom, or a system built to leave people behind. The key is to notice it, name it, and act against it. Find allies. Use your skills, however small they seem, to create change. Never underestimate the ripple effect of one act of courage. Felina's journey has stirred something in you. Anger at injustice, hope for change, or a belief in your own power. Keep that energy alive. This channel exists to share stories that inspire action. By subscribing, you join a community committed to speaking up, fighting back, and building a better future. Hit subscribe, share this story, and help us keep telling truths that can't be torn in half.